Thank you for letting me do something a little different. Instead of presenting research, presentation on how we actually tell the story of our research. And I've done this presentation in various forms for various groups, and I'm going to try to talk a little bit about it for scientists in the room, but also if you're someone who works with conservation organizations, a lot of times we need to also tell the story of what our organization does in annual reports, to donors, to funders, and so I'll try to address kind of both of those audiences to some extent in the presentation. So today I'm going to talk about a number of different issues related to telling the story of your research. So just to give you an idea of what this 45-minute presentation will be like, we're going to talk about just basically why we even need visuals, why you should even care about this when you have a million other things to care about when you're in the field and when you're doing research. I'm going to talk about volcanoes and show you a little case study story on volcanoes because everyone gets excited about volcanoes. Then we're going to talk about how to plan your own story. So taking that case study and how do you apply it to your own field work or your own research project. Then I'll have a series of photo and video tips that can help you take better photos even if all you have is a smartphone. And then we'll talk about some platforms for actually sharing these stories with the world. So you make all this great content, how do you get it out there? Who is your audience? So just to give you a little background, I have had the wonderful privilege of working in beautiful places all over the world to tell conservation stories. I started photography when I was 11 years old and really got into nature photography first. And then when I went to college and started studying, taking classes in environmental science and conservation, I got much more interested in how we tell stories of conservation. And now as a doctoral student, I really went back to school to try to understand how we could do that more effectively, and also how I could measure whether or not conservation campaigns actually make a difference. And so those are kind of my research interests. But in doing this work, a lot of what I've done is collaborated with conservation organizations. So I find that a lot of organizations know they need to do public outreach, but that's obviously a skill set that a lot of people don't have, and it often comes lower on the priority list because when we're working in conservation, which is often unfortunately a crisis discipline, we're working on putting out fires rather than thinking about telling our stories in dynamic ways. And I find that the same thing happens with researchers. And I think it's an important thing to say that I don't know about you, but as a doctoral student, I often feel like I'm being asked to wear a lot of hats, and as a scientist, we're asked to suddenly not only do our research, but to talk about it on Twitter and to have a page on, a website and a page, and that can feel really overwhelming. It's like, who do I actually need to engage with, and what type of images do I need to tell my story? So we'll talk a little bit about that as well. And I don't want you to feel, as we go through this, that you have to do everything I'm talking about, because obviously you have your audiences that you need to connect with, and you can target your outreach to those people. So why do we need images for stories? So this is an example I just wanted to bring up. This is a very good friend of mine. Her name is Morgan Heim. She's a photojournalist, and she was really the one that started documenting these illegal pot farms that are taking place in California's forests. So there's all of these big grows that are out in the middle of national forests. This had been something that had been on the public consciousness in terms of, policymakers and officials for a little bit, but the general public didn't know that much about it, and that was really because nobody had photographed it. And so Morgan went in, she's been working on this project for almost 4 years now. She created these amazing photos, like all of these, she put tea lights in all of the places where there were grows, where there were plants. And this is a big problem because when these illegal grows use a lot of really, really, really bad pesticides and herbicides, which are poisoning local wildlife, like the Pacific fisher. And so Morgan really was able to bring this conservation issue to the forefront of public consciousness, even in an article in Playboy magazine, because she had amazing images. And so I think when we're thinking about this role of being an advocate and a scientist, thinking about how visuals can help push our stories to the forefront is important. The other thing, all of us are going to have to do probably presentations like this one, but also dissertation presentations. And so thinking ahead, not just about what data you need to collect, but what images you will need to be able to illustrate your methods, your field site, your partners, your outcomes. Those are really important things to think about at the beginning so that you can make sure when you have those critical months in the field, you're getting the photos that you need for later on. And it's something we often forget to do because we're so busy in the field. This is an example of an image that went out a couple weeks ago with Professor Brett Sheffers. Needed some images of the bird trade because he had this paper come out, science on the wildlife trade, and he reached out to me and my partner Rick and asked if we had any photos because he didn't have any photos to illustrate that. And when journals publish articles, they want to have photos that can go along with those articles. And that really influences how your stories and your scientific research is picked up by the press. You know, when you send out a press release through the AP, they don't just want the text. They want the images so that they can quickly and under time pressure push these stories out. So I think that that's a really important point, is just to have those images or know people who have those images and plan ahead for that. The other thing is thinking about annual reports. So a lot of times I find that the images I create in partnership with conservation organizations end up being used in annual reports because that's they're trying to communicate to their donors what they've done, how they've done it, and why these beautiful places like Huaycacha Cloud Forest Biological Station in the Andes of Peru should be preserved. And so I also think about that when I'm taking photos. And I wanted to bring this up. This is, I think, an interesting trend in global giving. So this is just basically looking at, a lot of NGOs are kind of skeptical, I think, about how much time they should invest in social media, in their communications. But this shows, and this is a big multinational study that's done every year, that donors are most inspired to give by social media and fundraising events. 25% of donors. And social media is really driven by visuals. And so we need to have those visuals to engage funders as well. So I wanted to go through a story that I worked on in partnership with a scientist through a National Geographic funded expedition to Guatemala, just to kind of talk you through how I think through creating these images to tell stories of research. So a few years ago, this scientist who's a volcanologist, and she studies active lava domes, asked me if I wanted to come to Guatemala with her to help tell the story of her research. She'd been on all these amazing expeditions, visually stunning places, and she had some really shaky iPhone photos to show what these amazing places looked like. So she reached out to me, and we got together and wrote a collaboration grant with the cartographer to go to Guatemala, not only do the scientific research, but also to document it and to tell the story more broadly for both audiences in Guatemala and in the United States. And I will just point out, because I think it might be useful to you all, that was a National Geographic Weight grant. There are now storytelling grants that are available and that you can apply to with a storyteller. If you don't want to do this work yourself, but you want to bring someone like me to go to your beautiful field site and take photos, I know lots of people who would be happy to go take photos for you. And you can apply through grants specifically for that purpose. So this is Dr. Groki. This is this field site, which is in Guatemala. It's called Santa Maria. It's a volcano that actually has been active and has ongoing activity for over 100 years. And you can see on this face, this kind of rocky area, well, over 100 years ago, there was a huge eruption and it completely blew the face off of that volcano, and then all of the activity in the system kind of ended up coming out down here in these active lava domes below. For a scientist, it's an amazing place because you can camp at the top of this one and look down at the active lava domes below. So it's an incredible natural laboratory. So one of the photos that I knew I needed to take was this photo because I needed to show people, the audience, where we were, where we camped, and the relationship between these two mountains. So as a storyteller, before I went, I talked with Dr. Groki, we looked at Google Earth, and I knew that we needed to make this 6-hour drive around the volcano in order for me to take this image. And another important part of this image is, instead of just taking it from anywhere, we took it here because this is where lahars come down from the mountain and periodically completely rip out this bridge and the villages and surrounding areas. So it also talks a little bit about environmental hazards. So part of my job was to not just tell the story of the science, but also to tell the story of the experience. Because if you're ever asked to give a TED Talk on your work, or you're asked to give a broader public outreach talk on your work, people don't just want to see how you measured the bird's beak. They want to see, your incredible boat trip out to the island to measure the bird's beak. And so a lot of what I did was say, okay, what exactly is our expedition going to look like day by day? How long does it take to get to the top of the mountain? Are there different ecosystems and habitats that we pass through? What do I need to tell the story? So this is our hike up. It was about 7-8 hour hike up with all of our gear for 4 nights camping at the top of that big volcano. And then this is what our camp looks like. So a lot of what I'm doing while people are cooking, while people are having these activities that are just about surviving in camp, is I'm trying to document that. Because when I speak with public audiences, particularly kids, they often want to know, like, how did you eat? How did you shower? Like, what did you do? And those are really interesting for people because we're used to telling these stories to each other. They don't seem very exotic, maybe, but to the general public, super exciting stuff, right? Camping on top of a volcano for 4 days. So this is just a little video, because what I also do is use my iPhone, sometimes my bigger camera, but the iPhone is incredible these days, to take videos that actually give you some movement and show you a little bit more about what the experience is like. So I'll just say while this is playing, the goal was, of course, to look down on that volcano below. But as you're at the top of a mountain, the weather doesn't always cooperate. And so this was part of that storytelling, was to talk about what were the challenges that we encountered. Well, we had a beautiful, beautiful sunset, one of the prettiest sunsets I've ever seen, but we had almost 20 hours where we couldn't collect data. And so that's a challenge when you've got 4 days in the field. So this is Dr. Grokey, and this now gets in kind of to the science of what she was doing. So she uses photogrammetry to study active lava domes. So she essentially uses time-lapse photography. She uses 3 identical cameras set up and connected by radio transmitter to simultaneously take images of the active lava dome below. So she can hopefully speed those up and then understand subtle changes in the surface of the lava dome. And the real idea of that is scientists don't actually know how to predict volcanic eruption. We know a lot about volcanoes, but we can't predict eruptions yet. And so they're trying to see whether or not we can use technology to understand if there are predictable, repeatable patterns that happen before an eruption that we can then use as a predictive technique to forecast volcanic eruptions. So this is just her getting her gear set up, and it's a great way to talk about the 3 cameras and to also talk about the radio transmitters. So we knew we needed to get that photo in the field. And then this is a view of that lava dome from below during an eruption. So I knew we needed to get this shot, and that meant, sitting out for 8 hours watching the volcano until it erupted in the right way with the clouds clear. But these are shots that we had planned ahead of time and we had a list of, and then I could just check them off in the field to say, when I speak later, I'm going to need that shot. And then this is a zoomed in photo using one of those 3 long lenses, those 3 photogrammetry cameras. And then she's actually going to be imaging all 3 of those angles together, so you get more of a 3-dimensional model. But this just gives you an idea of what one of these eruptions look like. It's really neat. It's really scary when you're camping and it does that, and you're, what just happened? But it's really amazing to see, and this really helps, thinking through that we needed this visual as well to illustrate her research was helpful. And then we also did the photogrammetry at night to see, you can see the incandescence here. And, this is what people typically associate lava domes with big lava. That's not the case. And so we use with this type of volcanoes, we use this type of volcano to talk more about the different types of volcanoes around the world and how they're different and how eruptions differ. But people also like seeing that incandescence. It's really beautiful. And then one of the other things that we did while we were in the field, because we had a grant, was we had to do some outputs that were related to science communication. And so we partnered with National Geographic Explorer Classroom, and we hiked this satellite device up onto the mountain with us, and we were able to broadcast directly into school classrooms throughout North America, and actually do a live Q&A from the field with the three of us, the scientist, cartographer, and photographer, which is really awesome. And I know the person who runs this, they have 8 satellite devices that they're eager to get out in the field. So if anybody wants, is interested and has some cool field work, I can definitely connect you. But this is another image I needed to take, not just to do it, but to have a visual of this, because that was part of our grant output. So I also use those grant outputs and try to associate visuals with each of those outputs so that when I send in a report to the funder, they know exactly what I've done. And this image has been used in dozens and dozens of publications and outreach presentations by National Geographic, because most people don't think to do this part of the storytelling. They don't have many pictures like this. And then finally, one of the other outputs from this project was actually to collaborate with the Guatemalan Tourism Institute to create a public exhibit in English and Spanish that would talk about the hazards and benefits of living near active volcanoes. And so we had a combination of images that we took and had planned out, and then infographics that our cartographer had created. And this was donated to the Tourism Institute, but also opened right before we left in Guatemala after a month in the field. And it was really great. It was attended by a lot of press, and those images really helped us get the message out to a broader audience. So that's just one example, case study of the type of work that I typically do, or that I did before I started reading books all day as a doctoral student. But I think that it really indicates that storytelling is a process. And as I say, it can be an intimidating process, but if we break it down into very simple steps, it's something that all of you can replicate to some degree within your field research. So the first thing that I do is kind of think about and identify the story. And sometimes, if I'm the researcher, I know what the story is pretty well. If I'm working with somebody else, I will sit and interview the scientists for quite a long time to understand exactly what their goals are, what their research questions are, how they're going to use different methods to answer each of those research questions in the field. And that leads me to map out story ideas, which I'll show you in a minute, to actually create a map of all of the different images I can visually, think of that are envisioned that could help tell that story. And then what I also do often is, especially if I'm working with a conservation organization, I talk with partners about what their goals are. So, if it's a funder, I'll talk to the funder and I'll say, these are the things that we're going to be doing. What kind of images can you anticipate needing a year from now when you're writing up your annual report? And often what they'll tell me is, make sure you get the group photo of all of the people at the workshop, which is often a photo that we forget to get, and we don't have any photo, even though it's not the most exciting photo, it's a really important photo because it's the only thing that we have to show that we did that workshop. And then I just plan this shot list, which is just essentially a checklist of all the images I definitely need to get, and then the images that I wish, hope, would like to get should the opportunity arise. So what I usually do with this is actually a workshop where we would do a 3-hour workshop and you would actually map out your ideas for your own story. But in this case, I'll just go through it this way. And I'm happy to provide the worksheets from that by email, just in case they'd be helpful to people. But just, think about this as a potential scenario. So you're a researcher and you're reintroducing the Iberian lynx into a national park in Spain over the course of a 3-year project. You've got a 3-year grant, you're doing your dissertation work. At the end of that, you're going to have to talk about that project. What kind of images do you need? So what I would actually do is I would essentially put that in the middle, and I would just do a quick brainstorm of all of the potential images that I might need to tell that story. And you could structure those around the elements of a research paper very clearly, right? Like the introduction is going to cover threats to the Iberian lynx. It's going to cover like what's being done. It's going to cover where the Iberian lynx lives. The methods are going to cover how you're actually doing that. And so you could use that as a structure to think through that if you'd like to. That's what you're dissertation presentation is going to be. So just to give you an idea, when we did this in a workshop, you know, links in the wild is a hard image to get. So maybe we wouldn't get that. That's probably an aspirational goal. But we might be able to get linked tracks in the sand as a representation of the links in the wild. We can definitely get the national park landscape. That's an easy image to get, often one that people also forget to get. You're in the Amazon, you're photographing the birds, you forget to actually get a photo of the broader forest because you're so excited about the wildlife. You know, a video, planning ahead, not just images, but what are images that lend themselves more to motion? What parts of the story can be told better, not just with a still photograph? So having that, you know, iPhone ready for when you release the actual links into the wild. And then also, like, I mean, this is taking it a step further, but that's a really exciting moment, right? You've been working for 3 years, you've released, or maybe you've released the links in the wild after 2 years. Taking a video of yourself or the other scientists right after that emotional moment. I mean, that's the stuff that really gets at the narrative heart. And as scientists, we're taught to be a little bit more objective. When you're talking to public audiences, you don't just want those fact-based images, you want those emotional images, particularly when we're working in conservation. So I often think about what are the emotional points within this broader story, and how can I get images that tie into those and illustrate those. And a great one is, you know, just I didn't put this in here, but a lot of you work in tropical ecosystems. There's a lot of problems that we encounter in tropical ecosystems. So I will often be in a camp in Southeast Asia, filming leeches on my legs, which is a weird thing to do, but those are great visuals to have later on when I'm doing a presentation. It's like, look at these 17 leeches that are on my stomach. You know, people love that kind of thing. Or, you know, doing a little video after you've had a particularly hard field day and you're completely soaking wet because it hasn't stopped raining. Those are those moments that add something special to your story. So these are the 4 points that I would recommend if you do nothing else. Make sure that you get these images. Get a scene setter. Where are you doing your research? Get that broad scene setter. It could be the ecosystem and maybe the lab you're working in or the research station. The details, how are you doing your research? So what are the methods? And these can be boring photos, but they're important. So like a methods photo, if you're doing, you know, reforestation project, you can photograph the nursery, you can photograph the plants, you can photograph the digging the hole, you can photograph like a piece of land that's farther along in the reforestation project. Who are you working with? Really important. And why are you doing this work? So those are really important questions that can help guide those images, and at least you'll come up with those basic images. The other thing I wanted to just point out is that as part of the planning process, I often do this kind of pre-visualization exercise. So there's a lot of images in like National Geographic magazine are spontaneous photojournalism pieces. You're out on the street and you photograph this moment that unfolds for you, and it's amazing. There's a lot more that goes into it, but you know, that's essentially it. You're capturing a moment. But a lot of images are also planned and pre-visualized to some extent, because we know that, for instance, one image I think of is the story that was on the sequoias and the redwoods, and you know, it's someone standing in front of the redwoods with a photo of what that grove looked like before, and then you see it deforested in the background. That's a preconceived image because they needed to make a visual point. They couldn't do it just spontaneously. So I often say, okay, I'm going to Madagascar. I'm going to photograph baobabs. People back here might not know what baobabs are. They certainly don't know how big they are. So I'm going to put people around the bottom of them. And then when I get there and I see the right baobab, I can create this image, right? And that really helps me think through and know, because I've done that planning, when I get there and the opportunity presents itself, I'm like, this is the time. You there, we're making the baobab image. And that's been very helpful for me, because otherwise I forget. Are there any questions before we go into tips? Yes.
A lot of times we're in meetings. That's what we do, exciting stuff.
Oh, yeah.
And especially our meetings, we have a lot of people like in a circle. So it's not like here, you could have it be hard to get the image of you and proof, and if you're all in a circle, how do you deal with that?
Yeah, so I'll talk a little bit about that in tips, but my first instinct would be that I would climb on this chair or maybe even climb up here if it was safe. And I would get above with the iPhone and take a photo of the circle all together. So I would do anything I can to try to show it from a slightly different perspective, just so it's a little bit more exciting visually. And I'll have an example of that coming up. But it's a good question. How do you make those images dynamic? You can also use the panorama setting on your phone, which is really fun. Or you could do a short video, which shows a little movement and just is a little bit more visually interesting and breaks up the kind of slideshow presentation. Yeah. So I've got 10 tips that are just about, so now you have this plan, how do you actually execute it when you're in the field, and how do you create better images, even if all you've got is that smartphone. So my first one is for all of, I think this group works with a lot of people, but a lot of times I do this with natural scientists, and they just tend to photograph the birds and not the people. And so I would definitely focus on making sure that you get those images of people in the field doing the work. So this is an indigenous community in Madre de Dios in Peru, and they are the Caroswachiperi, and they are actually going through and mapping out their concession. And so this is an important image to tell the story of the work that they were doing. Here's an example of a meeting. You know, in this case, I climbed up some stairs so I could get above. Obviously, you couldn't do that quite as much right here, but just starting to even think that way, I think, is a step towards taking some more dynamic images. And sometimes I orchestrate them a little bit for this type of image, not for a photojournalism image, but for this type of image, I might say, could you move up a little bit so I can get that angle that I need. This was in Spain. It was a great workshop. So the other thing is make sure to turn the camera around. You are the researcher, you are the scientist. How many times have you gotten back and somebody wants a headshot or they want a picture of you in the field and you have nothing? So make sure you get someone to take those photos of you, or use that timer setting and be really goofy, but it feels goofy, but you can put it on a tree and you can get a photo of you bird watching in the rainforest, and that is totally fine. It's important. The other thing is shade is your friend. So in general, I find that people who are starting out in photography tend to think that the more sun, the better. And that actually creates harsh shadow that makes people not like how they look, because if we're, you know, have wrinkles, it makes the wrinkles look all the better. And so it's really important to push people when you're doing these group photos into shaded areas, just to make sure you're getting even lighting. If it's super early morning or late evening and you've got a beautiful backdrop, that's okay, but in general, middle of the day, use shade. And I think that natural light outside in the shade always looks better than like in here. So if you're gonna do a group photo, try to do it outside in the shade. Also use kind of other light to your advantage. So in this case, these young women, this is at a BioBlitz, they're in the shade, but the sun is shining here and it's reflecting this beautiful light onto her face that really lights her up. Sometimes, now this is more what I do as a professional, but I'll even have a reflector or a piece of cardboard that I can reflect light into somebody's face just to get that glow. But this works also with group photos. Like if you're outside and it's really bright and you put people on a shaded building and there's light or sunlight shining on the other side of the street, that light will actually reflect back and create this gorgeous glow on everybody's face. So next time you're taking a group photo, just kind of experiment with how the light looks. And one exercise that I use is, and you can do this right now, it always looks great when people do this, is you can actually put your hand up in front of your face and just move it around. And you can see very distinctly how different the light is as you move your hand around. And wherever the light is the most even, that's where the person's face should be. So that's just a helpful little trick. Show good and bad. Don't just show, you know, the reforestation. Show the deforestation. We often don't have the photos of the threats. they're painful for me to see sometimes, so I forget to take them, but I was in Madagascar and I kept making them pull over so I could photograph the deforested areas, not just get straight to the rainforest. In this case, this is just that example of actually going out of my way to go to bird markets to photograph in Southeast Asia so that I can make sure that I have those images as well when I'm talking about the Asian songbird crisis. We talked about this, so I won't go over it extensively, but remember to document the science, right? So get those detail shots. This is a captive breeding program, so these are eggs in the nest. I think they're echo parakeet eggs in Mauritius. This is a tortoise getting its annual checkup around the island in Mauritius. They actually go out and weigh these guys every year. Pretty amazing. So Seychelles, Aldabra giant tortoise from the Seychelles. But it's a fun image, but it really does show, especially to kids, like, how do you actually do science? Oh, it looks pretty fun and heavy. Take viewers behind the scenes. This is an expedition in Borneo, and here making sure to get that image of what field camp actually looks like, and also, what it looks like from the backseat of a small prop plane, right? Like, those are the exciting images that give you that context. Show the bigger picture. Get those broad landscapes that show the ecosystems that you're working in. I think that's really important, and I often tell people to not just take the big photo of the landscape, but if you can, in situations like this, include a human element so that you can show scale. People have never been to these places before. They have really no idea, just like the baobab, how big these places are. And so including human elements, whether it's people in a landscape or a tiny little chameleon on a person's fingertip, can really help show the scale and tell the story. Show a different perspective. So that it gets back to the question about the meeting, but it's often something that we talk about in the photography world, especially today, because there's so many images, and how do you get people's attention? And a good way to do that is to make sure that you're showing a different perspective. So up on top of the canopy tower at Los Amigos in Peru, looking down, from, I think it's 60 meters up. Or these are baby Aldabra giant tortoises on Round Island, and they're all labeled because they often get into trafficking situations, and they also are labeled so the scientists can keep track of them. And so instead of just taking one photo of an individual tortoise, I got a ladder, got up, and took photos down to show the group of tortoises. It's a slightly different perspective, a little more interesting. And then a big one, if you're an NGO, somebody working with an NGO in particular, is to make sure you leave empty space in your photographs, because you can always crop in, but you can't crop out. And a lot of times when we're doing the front of a donor report, we need space to put titles and headings, or if you get the cover of Nature, you want them to be able to put some text so they can actually write Nature at the top. So think about that when you're taking photos. Even with the iPhone these days, it's just like amazing resolution. You can definitely crop in, even if you just zoom out and leave a little bit more space. And then I mentioned this before, but just make sure to take some videos. I could do a whole other presentation on creating short films. That's a bigger workshop. But just in terms of, I'll try to play this. This is just with a GoPro, but it's really fun. It's just butterflies cuddling on the side of a river. But it just adds an element that you wouldn't get if you were just using still photography. And then the last thing is to just have fun. Because I think that, as I said at the beginning, it can feel really overwhelming when you go to these science communication workshops and you suddenly feel like, I have to get a blog, I have to get Snapchat, I don't even know what Snapchat is, and then I have to get Facebook, and I have to get Twitter. And my kind of general feeling on that is use the platforms that work for you, even if it's only one of them. Do that platform well rather than spreading yourself too thin. And Make sure that you just have that kind of authentic voice on that platform, whether you're a scientist, whether you're a conservationist, you're an organization, and have fun with it and think about how you can provide information and content that educates people but also inspires them and gets them excited. So I think that's important. And I do just want to mention a few quick platforms and free apps that you can use to help share your stories. Has anybody heard of story maps? I love them. This is one that we did, and I actually know Ross works there, and he was the cartographer on this expedition. I'll see if this works. If you haven't seen them, let's see if this works. Will that share the screen?
Yeah, no,
okay, good, great. So this is one that we created about the Volcano project, and you can basically embed maps in it, and it, here you can see, you can explore the volcano. It looks hard to use, it's super easy to use. Like TCD could do this for a lot of its projects, their student projects, or professors could use it. And it's just really beautiful visually. It's not showing up quite like it does on my screen right now, but it's a great way to include infographics, to do science communication, and to embed data. You can have one thing that we love doing when we go on expeditions is having a GPS tracker, so we track our actual path or our trail up a mountain, and then you can actually just like throw that really quickly. If that's not sensitive data, you can throw that on to one of these maps and these 3D visualizations, and you can say, this is the transect that we did. I think that's amazing. So that's definitely something I would encourage you to look at. And then also, if you don't know about it, Canva is a free graphic design program that I love. It has just this wonderful online platform. They have lots of free images you can use, but you can also upload your own. And I use this for all kinds of things. I use it for social media. I use it for like reports and annual reports. I also use it for presentations because you can design PowerPoint. It's great. It's just canva.com. And then these are just some important little apps that you could look at. You don't have access to the Adobe suite, which is expensive. Snapseed is a great kind of digital photo editor for your phone. It does pretty much everything that Lightroom and Photoshop do. Nik software by Google, I believe, is still free, and that also has a lot of great kind of photo editing software. I use Lightroom primarily now. That's $10 a month for a subscription for Photoshop and Lightroom. And that's mainly because I just have tens of thousands of images, and so that's as much a database software as it is an editing software. And then Easy Release is a really great one. So depending on who you're working with, you may need to get photo releases, and that's a big complication in the field sometimes. And Easy Release makes it kind of fun because you can digitize it all, and so they can read it on the phone and sign it on the phone, and you can even take a picture of the person and insert it into the release. Because I've definitely gotten photo releases before and then gotten home and said, oh, I don't know who Kim, is this Kim or is this Kim, in the photo. So that's a very helpful way to just keep track of those. Questions? Thank you.